Hello everyone, welcome to this video tutorial. I am Chidumen Namde. Here we are going to learn about the new Angular signal input and the new function based output. Now let's begin. We have an application here, a book application that renders a list of books and we can delete them. So it renders the title and the synopsis. So here we have the book list, which is the parent component. So inside the book list component, we have an array of book type. Then in each array we have an object. And each object represents a single book. So we have the title, which holds the title of the book, the synopsis, which holds the synopsis of the book. Now we have the second book, which is the title, the thing, the synopsis, the thing is coming. So in the book list component, you see here in the template that it loops through the books array, and for each book it renders a book component. Now we see that in the book component it has an input and an output. So the book list component passes each book to the book component via the book input property, and then the book component communicates a book to be deleted by the book list component via this delete book output property. So you see it calls the delete book event method here, which removes that particular book from the books array. So you see our book component has an input and also an output. An input that the book list component communicates a book or the current book to the book component, and the delete book output property in which the book component communicates data to the book list component, telling it the book to remove from the books array. So now let's go inside the book component. So as we can see, the book component in its template, it renders the book title, synopsis, and a button. So it accepts the book from this book class list property. Now, this book class list property is decorated with this at input decorator function. So by decorating it with this at input decorator function, it makes this book property to be an input property. So the parent component rendering this book component will send a book to this book component via this book property. So it will use the book public name or the book property name to send a book to this book component, and this book component will receive that book in this book property name or the book member name. So we have this delete book property also, or this delete book class view. Now it is decorated with the at output decorator. Now, decorating with an output decorator means that this delete book will become an output delete property in this book component. And now, whenever we decorate a property in a component with the output decorator, now that property must be an event emitter. So that's why we assigned it to have an instance of the event emitter, and then passing in a data here telling that it will emit a data which will be of a book type. Now this delete function is called by this button whenever it's clicked, and then it calls this emit method inside the event emitter class. Now this emit method is passed the current book here. So now this emit method will trigger the method that is attached to the delete book output property in the book list component. So it will trigger this delete book event because the book list component attached the method to the delete book output property inside in the book element. So you see it attached it to the delete book event and then passed in the data. Now this event becomes whatever book that is passed to this emit method. Now, so we have understood what is happening here, how the at input decorator works and how the at output decorator works. So whenever I click on this delete, it will call the delete function method, which is this, and then emit a book to the book list component. It will capture it here and then remove the book from the books array so that we will only see the remaining book. So when I click on vent data, we will only see the thing. And when I delete, when I click on this delete button in this detain book component, it will remove it and we'll see nothing because there is no more book remaining in the books array. So this is how it works now. Now, let us convert this at input and also at output to Angular signal input and function based output respectively. First, let's start with the Angular signal input. To convert it, we need to remove this. Now, the Angular signal input is a function. It is not a decorator, which is the beauty of it. So we will assign this book class field to the function call of the Angular signal input, which is the input function. So we will remove all this, add the equal sign here, then call the input function. Now we will import it from the Angular /com module, then make it an instance of a book. So we are telling, by doing this, we are saying that this signal here will have a value of book type. Now this input returns a signal. So now this book becomes a signal, no longer a book type as at before. So by doing this, this becomes a signal. And looking back at what we learned from my previous video on Angular basic signals, a signal is a getter function, and to extract the value inside a signal, we need to call it or invoke it because the signal is a function. So that's why we have an error here. So, and this will not pass because book is a signal and it has no dot title on it because it is a signal, it's not an object. So to make this work, we'll need to call this book here, invoke it as a function. So what we're going to do, we'll pass in the parentheses. Now we need to add an optional value here because it is undefined. So we don't want a situation whereby this will break, because if we have undefined returned as the value of this book signal, then it will not have the title property and this will break our application. So we will not add the optional symbol here. Then we'll do the same in this synopsis side. Add the optional value there because this input, because we did not pass an initial value inside it, this book will be a signal, then undefined will be its value. Now in the same case, we'll have to do something similar here. Now we need to make sure that the value being returned here is not undefined. So we need to actually send a book to the parent for it to delete. We don't want to send an undefined value. So this will not actually work like that. So what will come here, will extract the book we need to delete, then define a variable. Now let's call it book to delete. Let's use the English language so we will understand what we are doing. Then we'll now add an conditional check to make sure the book we are deleting. So if the book is undefined, we return, we don't do anything. If not, if this thing passes, then we know that whatever follows after this, that we have a value in this book.delete. So we'll come here and pass it book to delete. So this works very well. So in whatever programming we are doing, it's very good to use the early return exit so that when this returns, nothing is here, and after that, whatever that is after this line, that this book actually resolves to a value. So very good, and also makes our code neat. Now I think we are done with the conversion of our at input decorator to use the new Angular signal input. So we'll save, and then our application works as usual. So you see, we only did the conversion inside the book component. We did not touch the book list component at all to make it work. So you see that the at input decorator and the signal input function works very well, works seamlessly. So they integrate well with each other. So you just need to remove the at input, then make your call in your template whenever you are using the signal, and your component works very well without affecting the parent component. So it works. When we delete, it removes. Finally, everything is gone. Now, let's convert at output to use the function based output. Very first thing we need to do, we'll remove this at output decorator. Now, using the function based output, we don't need this new event emitter. So we'll remove it. Instead, we'll call the output function here. So it comes from the Angular core module. So we call it, then passing the type of data we'll be emitting, which is a book, then finally call the output function. So you see, now the name of the variable or the class field that is attached to the output function becomes the name of the output property that the parent component will use. So everything is clear. So we need to remove our unused imports or exports. We need to remove them. Then we will save, and then we will reload. When we reload, everything works. Now let's delete. So you see it works, and this goes away. So you see the output also works seamlessly with the output decorator. So we just need to remove the at output decorator, then assign the class field to be assigned to what the output function call returns. Now let's look at the documentation. You see that it returns the output emitter ref. Now the output function allows declaration of Angular outputs in directive and components. So it allows declaration of Angular outputs. So by doing this, we have declared this delete class field to be an output in this book component. So the parent component can attach to it using this parenthesis. So you see the difference. To attach to an input property in a component, we use the square brackets, the square brackets. But to attach to an Angular component output property, we use the parentheses. So inside the parentheses, we'll now we'll set the name of the class field, and then followed by an equal sign, then an empty string. Inside the empty string, we will now assign whatever our expression that we want to be executed whenever an event is emitted from this output property. So you see everything works well without any configuration from the parent side. Now we can also set alias on the output decorator. We can set an alias there because see it has an output function. So we can set alias. To set alias, we do something like this. Say alias, then change the name. Maybe say let's change it to just simply delete. So now this alias makes its value to be the public name of this property. So by setting this, we will no longer connect to the output property of this using the name of this class field. So we'll use the name delete instead as the public name. So by setting the alias to delete, we will no longer connect to this book component output property via the name delete book. Instead, we will use delete. So in this case, the book list component still have delete book here, and when we reload and click on delete, nothing will work because the book list component is no longer seeing delete book. So this is what the alias does. Alias is just to set the public name. Without the alias, then the public name becomes the name of the class field, which in this case the delete book. Then by setting the alias, the value of the alias becomes the property name of the output property. So I think this delete makes it is a keyword in JavaScript. So let me just say let me just write ngx delete book. So when we delete, we will click on delete, it will no longer see it. So we need to go to the book list component, change the delete book to ngx delete, then we reload, and when we click on delete, it works. So you see, so the same thing on the input, we can assign alias to it. Ngx book. Now let's write now, because we don't have any function definition of so it needs a book, assign undefined to it. Type of book, then come here, say or undefined. So very good. So we need a value before we can set the options here. So now we have changed the alias to ngx book. Now this ngx book will become the public name of the input property of this book class field. So it will no longer see book but ngx book. So now as we save, we have an error here, can't bind to book since it isn't a known property of book. So what we do is that we'll copy this ngx book, then come here to the book list component, change this book to ngx book and save. So our error is gone, and we'll see our application running very fine again. So now we can set required to the input signal. To do that, we'll come here and say dot, say dot required. Now this makes this signal to be required, so it doesn't become an optional. A value must be sent to it. So by default, an Angular signal input is an optional, but when we use this required, when we call the required method in the input object, then it makes that input property to be required. So the parent component cannot emit this whenever it's rendering this book component. So it must send an input property to the book component via this ngx book property name whenever it is rendering this book component. So let's go to the book list and try removing it like this. So when we remove and save, we'll see an error. Now when we go back and remove the required, then it renders. So you see it renders. So that's what the required does. So in Angular signal input, we have an optional input and a required input. So this by default is an optional input. Then calling the required on it makes it a required input. Now let's look at RxJS interoperability with output-based functions. Now we can convert an RxJS observable to an output, and also we can convert an output to an observable. So instead of emitting an output like this, we can use an observable and emit value, and then convert that observable to an output and assign it to this, and our parent component will still be able to get that observable emission. Now let me show you an example. Now let me delete this and now have let me say a subject book observable. So I'm using the dollar sign to say that this variable holds an observable so of a book. Very good. So we'll come here and call next on it. So now this next, as we see, will emit a value book delete. to this observable, which is subject book. Now let's make this emission to be an output based value so that this our book list component can be able to get this value. This is how we do it. Now what we need to do is we need to declare our delete book output property because we are getting it here. Then come back here. What we are going to do is that we will say output from observable. Now this what this means is that it will convert the observable we will pass to it to an output so that whenever we emit a value from the observable, it will be emitted via this property. So now this output from observable comes from the Angular/core and RxJS Interop. So Interop just a short form of interoperability. So that's where you import it from. Then it takes an observable. As you can see from the documentations, it takes an observable. So we are going to pass an observable to it, which is this subject book. Now this subject we are going to convert it to an observable by calling the as. So we'll do this dot. We are calling dot as observable. Then we'll save. So what we did here is that we declared a subject. Now we emitted value to this observable subject book here whenever we click on the delete book button. So for us now, this does nothing. This does not emit any output to this book list component at all. But we want this to emit a value whenever we call or emit a value inside this subject book observable. So to do it, we declared a class field, the same name as this, then called output from observable and pass the observable of this to this function. Now this function does the magic of converting the observable of this subject book dollar to an output so that whenever we emit a function here, it will emit a value to the parent component of this book component via this delete book. So this is what this output from observable does. So you see the interoperability there. So it is able to get an observable, then convert it to an output so that whenever the next function is called on the observable, then the output property will emit a value. The value it will emit will be the value that was emitted on the observable it was converted from. So in this case, whenever we call this dot next with the book to delete, now the observable, this subject book will get the value, and then this output from observable will get the value and then emit it inside from this delete book property so that the parent component will get it here. So let's go to our component. Let's empty cache and reload to make sure that we are not having the previous cache. So when we click on this delete, the thing will disappear and we'll see only the vendetta. So now let's delete. So you see it goes off. So you see our code works, and when we delete, click on these two, the vendetta goes away. So this is the work of output from observable. As we can see from the documentations, it says declares an Angular output that is using an RxJS observable as a source for events dispatched to parent subscribers. So you see, let me recap. We have a subject here. Now we are emitting a value to the subject whenever this function is called, which is when the delete function is called. So we are emitting a value there. We are not emitting any value via this delete book as we did previously. Now we're emitting a value to this subject. Now we want this emission to also be an output value. So that's why we now declared a delete property now called the output from observable function, which does this conversion, then passed the observable of this subject book to read. So that whenever we make this emission, output from observable will capture the emission and then emit it via this delete book to its parent subscriber, which is this book list component. So that's why it was able to capture the book here and then remove that particular book from the books array. Now, you see, we can convert an observable to an output. So also we can convert an output to an observable. So let's see it. Let me say constructor. Let me add a constructor. Now, to convert an output to an observable, we are going to use output to observable. This is an output. And then now let's subscribe to it to show us in our developer console whenever we emit a value to read. Or in fact, let me just use, for clarity, let me just use our normal output. Our normal output like this. Our normal output. So we come here, we will say delete book, so it can be clear to us what we are doing. So we are back to our previous code and output, what that happens. So very good. Now let's convert this to an observable. Now let's call it delete book dollar. Then we'll now say output to observable. Then we'll now pass the output, which is delete book. Then fine, we'll come here and I'll say let me implement on init. I don't want to do this in a constructor. Ng on init, so that now we will subscribe. This is now an observable converted from this output. See, this is a signal output, but now we converted it from an output to an observable. So you can see it, observable that emits a book. So we'll come here, we'll subscribe to it. We say this dot delete dot subscribe. So now we'll get our book, and then we'll console log it. Book emitted. This thing closing on my screen. Book emitted. Will now. Very good. So what we are doing here is that since this is an observable converted from this output using the output.observable. Now see, the output.observable comes from the same package as the output from observable, which is angular/core RxJS enter up. So, and you see it takes an output. So let's look at the documentation. You see, converts an Angular output declared via output or output from observable to an observable. You can subscribe to the output via observable.subscribe then. So you see, that's why we're able now to subscribe to it, and we'll log to our console whenever we emit a book. Now let's refresh, and then we'll bring up our developer console. We'll go to our console, then we clear it. Now whenever we delete, we'll see this thing logged in our console. So now let's delete. So you see book emitted. So what we deleted was the thing. So you see, we see it here. Now when we delete the event data, we'll also get it here. See it, the event data. So you see how we're able to convert an output to an observable and also convert an observable to an output. So this is the RxJS interoperability with Angular-based output function. So this is the end of my video. I hope you understood everything I did, and also thank you very much for sticking with me to the end of this video. Please like, share, and subscribe so as it will go a long way to boost my video, and also for other developers to see this video and learn about the new Angular signal input and output. Also, if you have any confusion or any mistakes you see or anything you want me at all to address, please leave a comment on that and I will address them. Also, if you need any Angular feature you need me to explain for you in a video, you can also drop that in the comment and I'll be very glad to address that and do a video on it. So also please make sure to read up on my previous videos on Angular signals, and signal inputs, effects, and all that, so that it will enable you to understand more of what we did here. Thank you so much, and see you on the next video. Bye.